Welcome back. We began this episode discussing the need for equal access as it pertains to the healthcare industry. In our closing conversation tonight, I was able to sit down with County Executive David Crowley to hear his vision for making Milwaukee County the healthiest county in Wisconsin through awareness of and access to services, crime prevention, criminal reform, and the intangible value of our county park system. Well, we're in 2022, but we are already thinking about the 2023 budget. When you presented your budget, one of the things you talked about was that Milwaukee County is going to have to, for the foreseeable future, do more with less because of a structural budget gap.
Yes.
What is that structural budget gap, and what does it mean?
Well, this year is about $12 million. And so a structural budget gap is basically saying that we're receiving so much revenues, which is pretty much capped, but we're not getting enough revenue to actually keep up with the cost of all the services. And so when you think about inflation, when you think about the rise in wages and things of that nature, we have to have revenues coming in, whether that's through a sales tax, whether it's through property taxes, or other means like different types of fees. But because we have a state cap that says that we can't raise property taxes over so much, that makes it much harder for us to actually fund many of the programs and services that mean so much to people. And a lot of that is because we are also an extension of the state of Wisconsin. So the state can actually mandate us to actually cover certain types of costs. And that could be related to the court system, jails, House of Corrections, or juvenile justice, just to name a few. And because of those inflationary costs, we will not have any dollars to invest in like our Milwaukee County Parks programs or Milwaukee County Transit System or in mental health services or even in our homeless outreach. And so our structural gap really hampers our ability to really make investments in our community as well as investments in our vision of being the healthiest county in the state of Wisconsin.
Now, obviously, there were some cuts that you did have to make because of those the structural budget gap. But you also have used the budget to kind of reshape and reinvest in some areas. And one of those areas is an area that traditionally has seen cuts, Milwaukee County Parks, which people really know and see as a treasure in our community. What's your vision in terms of what you're going to be able to do now in Milwaukee County Parks because of this increase in the budget for?
Oh, absolutely. When you think about our county parks, I mean, for the past 30 years, they've seen a lot of reductions. And this is a good thing for us related to this budget, not seeing the major cuts to different types of services. And so we will see some major some service reductions in some of our programs. But when you think about our parks, I truly believe that they are the beating heart of communities, right? This is a place where families, no matter your income background, no matter where you live, because we have 157 parks all across Milwaukee County, where people can get not just that mental refuge, but also get some physical activity and where families can come together. And so when I think about our park system, you know, we still have a huge capital backlog. But so investing this $1.5 million into the park system is going to help us make sure that we can continue to have a safe space for many of our families, but we want to continue to do more. And so this is going to give us the ability to really reach out to many different communities all across the county and let them know that our park system is there for them. So no matter what season it is, no matter what time of the day it is, just not after 10 o'clock p.m., that we want them to really enjoy our Milwaukee County Park system. And so for us, this is an investment not just in racial equity, but in health equity, because we know that the disparities in health lies along the lines of race. And when we look at the health disparities here within the state of Wisconsin, we're one of the least healthiest counties in the state. And so for us, this is how we're able to give back to the community and really reinvest in our mission and vision again.
And you talked about making Milwaukee County the healthiest county in the state. How does the vision of the parks piece really work to move that forward?
So one of the things we talk about is how do you invest upstream, right? So when we think about what we're seeing in the community, a lot of the times we are treating symptoms, right? But we need to really focus on the root causes. What is getting people to have police contact? Why are people homeless? What do we need to do to really invest upstream? So when we think about our parks, just in general, mental health wise, this is a place where you can go and just relax. You ever go to one of those parks? Everyone has their favorite park. My favorite park is Nash Park, which is not too far from my home. And, whether I'm walking my dog or my dog Cosmo or taking my kids to Nash Park to play on the swing set, it's a place where I can just sit down, relax, look at the beautiful trees, look at the changing of the leaves, during the fall. But more importantly, just really just take a mental break and just think about, my present being. And so when we think about parks, that's one way of doing it. But when you think about parks, right, it's not just those parks. We have thousands of miles of trails. We have golf courses. So we have the ability to invest in our physical activity as a community. And we want people to utilize that, whether they're walking or riding their bike on those trails. And so when you think about that physical aspect, when you think about particularly, we talk about health disparities, particularly in the Black community and so many people who may have like a chronic health disease. When you go into a park, there's ways that we can mitigate a lot of these issues that we see in our communities. And we want people to look at our parks, not just a space to go play, but a space where you can get that physical well-being that you need. So for us, this is a tremendous investment back into the community. But also we know that we have to tell our story about what the parks are here for, what do they do for people, and really encourage people to really activate them, because the more we activate our parks, the safer our parks are as well.
You're also making a really significant investment when we talk about making Milwaukee County the healthiest county in the state. You're making a significant investment in both mental health and in physical health, $21 million for the community access to recovery services. How will that money be spent, and what do you anticipate we'll begin to see as some of the outcomes of that investment?
Well, when I think about the outcomes, I'm hoping that we start to see a reduction in many of the calls that we have seen in this past pandemic, right? We have seen mental health crisis calls uptick. We've seen an uptick in suicide calls. We've seen an uptick just in all the negative things because of the onset of this pandemic. And so when you think about this particular investment, this is about how do we give people critical access to the services and programs that we need. And we know that that's one of the biggest barriers for people having access, is even knowing that those programs are even out there. And, earlier this year, we started a health and healing series where, I grew up in a home that suffered from both mental illness as well as drug addiction, and wanted to talk about my story because we have to normalize these conversations, really breaking down the stigma. And so for us, how do we continue to make those investments, making sure that people know where the services are, and not coming to us to figure it out, but going directly to their doorstep, going to their community to make sure that, we're going to give you access. We're going to tell you what the resources are, because if you have to come find them, you may not be able to, because you may not have access to the internet or the resources needed to access that information. And so for us, this is about how do you get access not only to the mental health services that you need, but the recovery services that so many folks desperately need. Because when you think about last year, we broke a record in the amount of opioid deaths that we've seen, and we want to get ahead of that. And so this $21 million investment is going to help with that. But there's so much more that we need to continue to do in this community. But that's going to take all of us stepping up and making sure that we have the resources to make those investments.
So when we look at these investments, you really see them as being community-based, making sure that what folks need to access is where they are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Growing up, I faced evictions. And, my mother, when we were going through an eviction, it wasn't because she didn't want to pay her rent. It was because she wasn't getting enough hours, being a bartender or being a wait staff, right? And so, she had to figure out, how do I find these services? How do I make sure that we have a roof over our head? But not just that, right? Because, how do I make sure I can put food on the table? And if we get a roof over our head, how do we make sure we can pay for the utilities? You have to know where those resources are. And so, coming from where I come from, growing up on 23rd and Burleigh in the 53206 zip code, and moving to 22nd and Brown, and then the 24th and Lloyd, and then the 29th and Walnut, and the list goes on and on because of the housing insecurity that we lived under. It was about how do we get access to those resources. And I got involved in politics because, I started doing community work, and I truly, blame this community for creating me who I am today. And so this is a way to really give back. And when you think about government, We are in partnership with the community, and we can't do this alone. And when you think about the times that we're living in right now, not everyone really trusts government to do the right thing. So for us, it's about how do we bring more people to the table, build a bigger table so we can continue to collaborate, but more importantly, coordinate the services that everyone absolutely needs.
One of the things you're also looking at in the budget is the House of Corrections, and really kind of working to provide people when they're in the House of Corrections some of the support that they need so they can successfully complete their time there, but then also end recidivism or at least help to reduce that. Tell us a little bit about those efforts.
Well, again, growing up in the 53206 zip code, this is one of the most incarcerated zip codes in the country. I would possibly say the world, because I don't think they use zip codes anywhere else, outside of the United States. But we can't continue to have a revolving door when it comes down to our criminal justice system. And so we want to make sure that people are not coming back to the House of Corrections, which is going to be now the Community Reintegration Center, which we're really excited about. We really want to give people the resources that they need so they don't have to, go and make a decision that's going to land them in the House of Correction or a state prison, because they're trying to put food on the table, right? Trying to make sure they have a roof over their head. So if we want to make sure that people are living their best lives, not just for themselves, but for their families and for this community, we have to give them the tools. We have to give them the resources that they need to be productive citizens. And so we're going to focus on how can we, train them? How can we upskill them in many different capacities in many different industries to make sure that once they leave our four walls, that they're actually going back and finding employment, finding housing, finding health care, so they can become productive citizens. And that's critical. That's critical in this time frame, if you ask me, because, this is how we invest back into people. When people make mistakes, they make a mistake. And in order to make sure that they don't make another mistake, we have to make sure that they have everything that they need. And sometimes that's not just the resources, but that could be the support that they need from other people who've been in similar situations. And so that's one of the reasons why we invest in like the Credible Messengers program, people who've been involved in the justice system in some capacity, but can be mentors to young people before they enter our system and really support their families in helping out with that young person. And these are things that we have to continue to do, because again, the more we can invest in our people, the more we can see an upward trajectory in making sure that this is the best community we can live in. 10
years from now, what does Milwaukee County look like?
Oh, wow. Our vision is that by achieving racial equity, we'll be the healthiest county in the state of Wisconsin. And, it's really about I want to see racial equity all throughout Milwaukee County. And what that looks like is having diverse communities, not just within the city, but across all 19 municipalities, having a transit system that gets people to and from work, not just within the county, but working with other municipalities outside the county to make sure that people have access to those family sustaining wages. I think about mental health, having a robust mental health system, behavioral health system that gives everybody the access and the services that they need. And not just when there's a crisis, but when they know that, something seems off and I need a little bit of help, and we can talk about the mental wellness of everybody. Seeing a reduction in the violence and the crime and the reckless driving that we're seeing, because we're finding things to keep our young people not only motivated, but occupied. Because, like my grandmother used to say, idle mind is the devil's playground. And so we want to find things for everyone within Milwaukee County. But the real idea is that no matter where you come from across this country or across this world, we want folks to know that Milwaukee County we have a place for you. No matter your ethnic background, no matter who you love, no matter your gender, we are here to support you in every capacity that you need. And it's really about investing in the quality of living of individuals so we can be the best place in the Midwest. I tell everybody you can leave the East Coast, you can leave the West Coast, you can leave the Gulf Coast, and come on up to Milwaukee where we have the Fresh Coast.
County Executive Crowley, thank you so much for sharing your vision with us and for spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.